I am the most useless prince of Daliang. Disguised as a man for 20 years. My reputation is so poor even dogs despise me. However, the regent plotted a rebellion. Painting the palace in blood, he stormed the imperial temple and finally caught me by a dog hole as I was about to flee. His bloodstained sword tilted my chin up. He narrowed his eyes, scanned me for a moment, and suddenly smiled. It's you, useless enough to be easily controlled. And so, I became his puppet emperor. But later, the plot took an increasingly absurd turn. When he taught me to review memorials, his hand-over-hand embrace was suffocating. When he took me to the gardens, his wolf-like eyes were fixed intently on my lips. When I feigned sleep, his fingertips would secretly brush through my hair. Until one night, he pinned me down, reeking of alcohol. His hot breath, laced with wine, held me captive. His palm, carrying a scorching heat and unquestionable force, suddenly stopped at my chest. With a mix of doubt and danger, he asked, Your Majesty, how is it that you're missing something here? The air was thick with the sickening scent of blood. Distant fires dyed half the sky a deep crimson. I sprinted for my life along the base of the palace walls, clutching a bundle tightly in my palm. It was the soft armor my late mother had sewn for me. Meanwhile, the roars of the rebels mixed with the screams of the palace staff. The clashing of steel drew closer by the second. Clearly, the Vermilion Bird Gate had been breached. My heart was racing with anxiety. I ran as if the wind were under my feet, and in a flash, I reached the west side gate. Looking at the weed-choked dog hole before me, my eyes lit up. It was as if I saw the hope of survival. Mother said dignity is hollow. Only staying alive is real. So, as for crawling through a dog hole, I had absolutely no psychological burden. I briskly rolled up my sleeves, bent down, and shoved my head inside. Who knew I had overlooked a fatal problem? When I was bullied by my brothers and sisters years ago, I was still a child when I used this hole. My frame was slender then. Now, after 20 years of imperial meals, my body had long since filled out. As a result, I was miserably stuck. No matter how hard I twisted my body, the hole seemed to have grown teeth, clamping down on me. Finally, after a long while, I stopped my desperate struggle in despair, accepting my fate as a prince stuck in a hole. When I was hauled to the center of the great hall, all I could see were pairs of blood-stained combat boots. Behind me came the heavy sound of iron boots crushing green tiles. Then, a cold blade tilted my chin up. Surrounded by layers of troops, I saw clearly the backlit face. Firelight danced on his face, and my heart skipped a beat. I didn't expect it to be Shani. He clearly didn't remember me. Once, at a palace banquet, he had gotten lost in the palace, and I had helped him. On that face, more beautiful than any woman's, were splashes of striking blood. He gave a cold huff, and suddenly laughed softly. His eyes were full of mockery. A prince in a dog hole, the first of its kind in history. Before his voice faded, the sword tip suddenly turned, aimed straight for my throat. The survival instinct made me instantly grab the sharp blade. Warm blood dripped from my palm, hurting so much that tears welled in my eyes. My lips trembled as I begged for mercy. Don't kill me. Shani narrowed his soul-stirring phoenix eyes, using the blood-stained blade to gently pat my cheek. His tone was chilling. The ninth prince? I heard he's as timid as a mouse, too afraid to even kill a rabbit. Then he leaned in close, his hair brushing against my neck, breath smelling of iron rust puffed by my ear. How about this? Bark like a dog 3 times. This king might consider sparing your pathetic life. The moment my nails dug deep into my palm, my dignity shattered. I lunged forward and clung to his leg. Woof. 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 The whole hall fell silent. The sword in Xingyi's hand fell with a clang. He picked me up like a little chick, his fingertips pinching my chin so hard it hurt. His eyes were full of contempt. The Xiao family are indeed spineless wretches. Just then, the blood-covered old prime minister nearby screamed at the top of his lungs, My lord, keep him, and you are a hero of the state. Kill him, and you are but a traitor. Xingyi's hand froze in midair. At that critical moment, I took the chance to wipe my snot and tears all over his expensive battle robes. Trembling as I declared my loyalty, I will follow you until death. Shani gave me a look of pure disgust. Finally, he nodded, his lips curling into a strange smile. Very well. Useless enough to be easily controlled. Later, the historians wrote, Your Majesty, in the autumn of the first year of Qingping, Regent Shani supported the new Emperor Xiaoyu's ascension. It was a beautiful tale of harmony between monarch and minister. In reality, Shani led troops into the palace and found that this spineless prince was simply the perfect puppet. No one knows that on the eve of the coronation, the new emperor huddled under the bed and shook all night. Meanwhile, the germophobic regent washed the battle robes I had stained exactly 10 times in the side hall. At the coronation ceremony, I wore the bright yellow dragon robes for the first time. Shinny stared at me for a long time. Then suddenly sneered. He mocked, the ancestors could support 12 tassels. But your majesty looks like a slave stealing human clothes. I lowered my head in shame, looking at the floor-dragging hem. My fingers nervously clenched inside my sleeves. Suddenly, he walked over with great strides. Roughly pulled open the loose jade belt at my waist. And tightened it again. The force was so great it nearly broke my ribs. Then, he slapped me on the back, making my vision go dark. Stand straight, he barked. How can the Emperor of Dalian be a hunchback? The officials lowered their heads to hide their laughter, their shoulders shaking. I bit my lip hard to hold back the tears. It wasn't just the clothes that didn't fit. This dragon crown on my head was heavy enough to nearly break my neck. Xinyi's sinister voice whispered in my ear. A command that brooked no argument. Your Majesty, look up. Instinctively, I snapped my head up, meeting his scrutinizing gaze. Xinyi was incredibly handsome, but his eyes were too fierce. He looked at everyone as if they were already dead. The Minister of Rites shouted from outside the hall, reminding us that the hour had come. Xinyi gave me one last look. Suddenly, he reached out to brush away non-existent dust on my shoulder, whispering a warning. Remember, no matter what happens later, don't speak. Just nod. I nodded like a terrified quail. Thinking, isn't that obvious? A puppet disguised as a man wouldn't dare say a word. The ceremony went smoothly. If you ignore the 2 times I tripped on my robes, nearly falling flat on my face, and Xinyi standing by the throne the whole time, radiating a cold aura like a god of death. When the ceremony concluded, the old Prime Minister tremblingly asked, Does your Majesty have any edicts to proclaim? I had just opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Xinyi coldly cut me off. His Majesty is overcome with grief. The Regency will temporarily manage affairs. The officials were as silent as winter cicadas. I cooperatively shrunk my neck. See, this is the spineless emperor they chose, stripped of even the right to speak. It turns out being a puppet emperor is also exhausting. First, there is the morning court. I must be dragged from my bed long before dawn, wrapped in layer upon layer of dragon robes, bearing a crown weighing over 10 pounds, to sit on the throne like a statue, motionless for 2 whole hours, and Xinyi stands just 3 steps below me, using that murderous gaze from time to time to warn me not to doze off. As soon as I meet his fierce eyes, I immediately shrink my neck into my wide collar, playing my role as a coward perfectly. After court, I heard him scolding the Minister of Rites. The dragon robe measurements are all wrong. Are your eyes just for show? Go and make 1 inch. That fits properly. The bedchamber was cold and empty. Only one drowsy little eunuch was at the door. There were very few servants attending me. After all, everyone knew in their hearts who the real master of Dalian was now. I was actually relieved. I couldn't wait to unwrap the layers of chest binders and breathe the fresh air greedily. Sitting at the desk, my brush strokes were powerful and controlled. Once the page was full, I suddenly snapped back to reality and hastily, under the bamboo lamp, burned it all to ashes. Hiding one's talent is the only way to survive. This was the survival rule my mother taught me since childhood. If not for this, my mother and I would never have survived in this cutthroat palace. Until now. I'm suddenly glad my mother passed away early. Otherwise, seeing my current state as a puppet, she would surely have shed tears of heartache. My mother was once the favored consort. But when she gave birth to me, she was framed by villains. To save our lives, she had to lie and say I was a prince, even before the emperor arrived. The room was already full of rewards. My mother was forced into a corner and secretly dealt with everyone who knew the truth. From then on, I was forced to be a boy for 20 years. To avoid suspicion, I had to pretend to have a weak constitution, to be a useless coward. Only then could I survive in the treacherous harem. Unfortunately, my mother also lost favor because of me, eventually dying of a broken heart. The late emperor never looked at her again until his death. The late emperor's tyranny led to his current fate of having no heirs. It was well deserved. Thinking of this, I thought of Xinyi again. He came from a family of generals. He should have been a high-spirited young commander. But the late emperor framed him with false charges. His entire family was executed. No one expected him to be so resilient. Not only did he survive, he became the regent above all others. Thinking that I'll have to live under such a ruthless man, my heart can't help but tremble. Just then, Xinyi arrived. He looked around my shabby bedchamber, his face suddenly darkening. He said coldly, Tell those servants. The items here are pitifully few. Perhaps I should display their heads here to make up the numbers. If word gets out, people will only think it was by my permission. Xinyi is a man of deep calculation. I rubbed my nose, and feeling his gaze on me, I immediately knelt down by reflex. Thank you for your grace, my lord. I lowered my head. My submissive manner only sparked his dissatisfaction when his gaze touched my slender neck. I instinctively shrunk back. I was only wearing a thin inner robe, my snow-white skin exposed to the air. looking exceptionally fragile. Shini gritted his teeth, his eyes dark and unreadable. Your Majesty is so frail. You don't look like a man at all. It seems I must train you well. I was terrified. I quickly gave a submissive reply. I didn't expect Shini to be a man of his word. He had only just mentioned it. And the next morning, he dragged me to the military camp. The camp was filled with masculine energy. Bare-chested soldiers made my head spin. Shini glanced at me sideways several times, frowning hard enough to crush a fly. He insisted on making me ride a horse, but looking at that tall steed, I only felt dread. I couldn't even climb onto its back, let alone talk about a royal expedition. He watched coldly as I trembled before the mounting block. I instinctively wanted to argue that I'm just a figurehead. Why would I need to lead an expedition? But seeing his eyes, which seemed frozen over, I swallowed the words back. When I, like a useless failure, for the third time, slid off the horse, Shini finally lost his patience. He grabbed my waist and threw me onto the horse's back like a sandbag. I screamed in terror. Clinging to the mane, my lord. He barked a command. Tighten your legs. Why are you shaking? It won't eat you. Unexpectedly, the horse reared and whinnied. I lost my balance and slid off to one side. In a whirl of dizziness, Shini lunged forward to catch me, resulting in him being pinned to the ground as my cushion. When he pushed me away, his eyes were full of disgust. He dusted off his clothes and said mockingly, Your Majesty even needs a cushion when falling. I looked at Shini's elbow, where a large patch of skin was scraped raw. I was too scared to speak, only using my sleeve to clumsily wipe my brow of the dense cold sweat. With a dark face, Shini threw me back to the palace, but he didn't leave. Instead, he sat on a low couch, staring at me with a heavy gaze. That look made my heart flutter with anxiety. Suddenly, I noticed the injury on his elbow. I thought, could it be because I hurt him? He's planning to cut off my head? As soon as that thought arose, I broke out in a cold sweat. I hurriedly pulled out a jar of ointment. My mother had prepared it for me in the past, specifically for bruises and injuries. I crawled to Shinyi's side like a sycophant, kneeling at his feet. Seeing that he didn't show any sign of rejection, I finally dared to look up, flashing an extremely flattering smile. I held the plain-looking jar of ointment in both hands, carefully moving closer. My lord, this is a healing balm, though it's not a precious item. It works wonders on bruises. Shinyi pressed his lips together and said nothing, only coldly rolling up his sleeve and extending his muscular arm to me. The ointment on my fingertips melted on his hot skin. I was meek and submissive, massaging it very carefully, for fear of hurting this living king of hell. I didn't notice at all the strange emotion surging in Shinyi's eyes. Suddenly, as if he could take it no more, he kicked my shoulder hard and walked out of the palace with great strides. His back actually seemed a bit flustered. I fell miserably to the floor. That kick had been held back, so it didn't hurt much. I only wondered in my heart, this regent's temper is truly too unpredictable. I thought Shinyi's departure meant I could have a few days of peace. But the next day, under the blazing sun, this great figure came to the office again. He sat in the pavilion, leisurely sipping tea, while I was struggling, with a bow that felt like 1,000 pounds, breaking out in a cold sweat. Even with all my strength, the bowstring remained motionless. Just then, the teacup in Shinyi's hand slammed heavily onto the stone table. It made me tremble all over. He walked toward me with a dark face. Haven't you eaten? The next second, Shinyi held me from behind, his large palm directly covering mine, forcing me to pull back the bowstring. Warm body heat radiated through our clothes, and my ears turned red despite myself. Seeing the arrow fly out, it landed crookedly on the edge of the target. The servants attending nearby couldn't help but let out suppressed chuckles. Immediately, Shinyi, with a cold face, shoved another arrow at me. Continue. I didn't dare say a word, even though my fingers had blisters, until the 10th arrow missed again. He suddenly pulled apart my bleeding fingers. His eyes were terrifyingly dark. Useless. Since ancient times, men have been muscular. Why do you look like a lady raised in a boudoir instead? Your skin is so tender. I was so scared I shrunk my neck, not daring to answer. But then he suddenly leaned toward my neck, his nostrils flaring as he took a sniff. His gaze instantly became disgusted. Why does your majesty smell like face powder? My heart skipped a beat. I had a hardship I couldn't voice. Since childhood, my body had a natural fragrance. My mother had worried herself bald over it. The best way was to avoid close contact. I never expected Shinyi, with the nose of a dog, would lean in to ask. Shinyi clearly had no patience to wait for a non-existent answer. He snorted and left, flicking his sleeve. I stood there with a bitter smile. Perhaps before Shinyi gets angry enough to kill me, I'll be scared to death by his sudden actions. The next day, I received a pair of exquisitely crafted gold silk gloves. The lining was even padded with soft rabbit fur. At the court assembly, Shani gave me a sarcastic sideways glance. Your Majesty is delicate. Don't come crying later that your hands hurt. From then on, Shani seemed to have developed an addiction to grooming me as his puppet emperor. Since physical training didn't work, he tried the intellectual route. In the imperial study, Shani looked at the scribbles I intentionally wrote. He let out a faint sigh. Your Majesty's handwriting is truly beyond words. No wonder you'd crawl through a dog hole. It seems a leopard truly can't change its spots. My cheeks burned. I could only hold my breath and play dead. I could tell the master was in a good mood today. Suddenly, Shani stood behind me, leaning down to enclose me in his arms. His warm breath was fully released behind my ear, teaching me hand over hand, use force in your wrist like this. I didn't dare move a muscle, because his whole body was pressed against my back. Through the thin dragon robe, I could even feel the powerful thumping of his heart. Suddenly, he squeezed my wrist. His voice was low. Focus. Do you understand? I roared internally. How could I not understand? I am a genuine maiden. Although Shani doesn't know. After finishing the last character, just as I was about to heave a long sigh of relief, I saw Shani's fingers unconsciously rubbing and kneading the back of my hand. His eyes were dark and murky. Your Majesty's skin is quite delicate, not like a man's at all. I nearly slid off the dragon throne in fear. My voice was trembling as I spoke. My lord, you must be joking. Shani still maintained that ambiguous posture. I turned my head to look at him. At that critical moment, I didn't miss the slight movement of his Adam's apple. Days passed in a series of scares. I was lucky my head was still firmly on my neck. Perhaps after being emperor for so long, I couldn't help but start caring about national affairs. During the late emperor's reign, the floods in Jiangnan were already a mess. Since Shani took power, he's been worried night and day. Now that summer is approaching, he was so anxious he had blisters on his lips. When the report on the Jiangnan floods came in, Shani was listening with a dark face as the Ministry of Revenue cried poverty. Though I was a puppet, I was listening intently. Sitting high in the imperial study, I quietly listened to their dispute. The old prime minister tremblingly suggested opening the granaries to soothe the displaced people. Xingyi's fingertips tapped the table irritably. He sneered, release grain? Of the 300,000 pickles released last year, how many corrupt officials were fattened up? The people didn't get even a single sip of soup. The hall was deathly silent. I shrunk back on the dragon throne, the thoughts in my heart rolling around my tongue. Finally, I whispered, how about relief through work? All the officials in the hall turned their heads in unison, looking as if they'd seen a puppet suddenly come to life. Xingyi's eyebrows twitched slightly, his gaze sharp. Does your Majesty know what relief through work means? I sat up straighter, but looking at Xingyi's cold, handsome face, my voice grew smaller and smaller. It means letting the victims build dikes and dredge rivers, and giving out food as their wages. He suddenly stood up, his dark python robe swept over one arm. A huge shadow loomed over me instantly. Who told your Majesty? I swallowed hard, trying to stand my ground. I read it in a book. The courtiers' faces, holding back laughter, flickered in my peripheral vision, as if waiting to see this puppet emperor be slapped to the ground by the regent in the next second. Unexpectedly, Shani remained silent for a moment. Suddenly, he agreed, and the hall fell silent instantly. Not only were the ministers shocked, even I didn't expect that Shani would actually adopt the opinion of a useless person like me. He treated me with respect. As soon as the law was enacted, it showed immediate results in the Jiangnan area. Shani was in a great mood. The palace held a special celebratory banquet. Shani didn't say much at the banquet, but a faint, lingering smile played on his lips. After a few drinks, he suddenly held a golden cup, leaning over to whisper in my ear. I thought your Majesty was naive about worldly affairs, but I didn't expect you to have the state's prosperity in your heart. This cup should be a toast to your Majesty. I was flattered and overwhelmed. Holding the golden cup tremblingly, I drained the wine. In the next second, seeing what Shani pulled from his robe, I spat out all the wine in my mouth with a loud spray. Xingyi's face darkened. I hurriedly used my sleeve to wipe the wine stains off his handsome face, but my eyes were fixed on the scroll in his hand. Feeling troubled, I had flipped through this book countless times in private. It was filled with dense annotations. Worse, those notes were written in my real handwriting, with no attempt to hide my skill. Shani didn't seem to mind. He just looked at me with those deep phoenix eyes. Your Majesty actually writes such a good hand. Don't hide your light under a bushel anymore. Let this official see your Majesty's true talent. The Jiangnan Water Conservancy was a success. Shani broke precedent and took me out of the palace. The carriage rumbled along the cobblestone road. I peeked out the window curiously. Every commoner had a happy smile on their face. The carriage stopped at a rural field. Shinny got out of the carriage. He scooped up a cluster of golden wheat in the fields. I had never seen him so happy. That joy radiated from his very bones. I walked toward Shinny, letting down all my guard for the first time. Jiangnan had suffered from floods for years, but the late emperor, just to please his favorite concubine, diverted the disaster relief funds to build that cursed star-plucking tower. I remember that tower reached the clouds, but beneath it were piles of white bones. Xinyi's smile faded. He looked at me with a complex expression. On impulse, I brushed away. The weeds stuck to the cloud patterns on his sleeve. I whispered, the first thing you did after taking power was to manage the Jiangnan floods and strive to provide a livelihood for the people. Thank you for saving the people from fire and water. The late emperor's tyranny. I knew it all too well. Even without Xinyi, there would have been a Zhang Yi or a Li storming the palace with a sword. Xinyi's eyes reddened slightly. He suddenly reached out and grabbed my arms. Something hot surged silently between us. After returning to the palace, Xinyi jumped off the carriage first. For once, he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he reached out and firmly supported my arm. However, Xinyi has been very strange lately. First, he suddenly ordered all the young eunuchs to be removed from my palace. Then, he started coming to my quarters every day, as if possessed. I looked at the mountain of meat in my bowl and looked at him pitifully. My lord, I really can't eat anymore. Xinyi expressionlessly added a piece of sliced duck into my bowl. Your Majesty is frail. Eat more so you can be healthy. You fall ill every few days. I frowned. That was true. Recently, the wind had picked up and I had caught a cold on the way to and from court. I gently pressed my abdomen. I was so stuffed that my stomach was starting to ache. Using my chopsticks, I mechanically shoved the meat into my mouth piece by piece until my face turned pale and cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Only then did Xinyi notice something was wrong. After a while, he said I was extremely weak, so dietary supplements might not be effective and could even damage my spleen and stomach. Xinyi frowned with a cold face, his tone stern. You look like this after just one bowl. Your Majesty's body needs proper conditioning. From then on, bowls of bitter medicinal meals were forced down my throat. My life was miserable. Unfortunately, these medicinal supplements were too potent. During countless late nights, I looked at the chest binding that was becoming too short and fell into deep thought. At this rate, can I still keep the secret? In the imperial garden, I walked cautiously by the regent's side. He suddenly turned to inspect me. Your Majesty has put on a lot of weight lately. I see your Majesty's chest has developed quite a bit. Very masculine indeed. I was so scared my foot slipped, nearly falling flat on my face. Luckily, Xinyi was quick-handed. He grabbed my waist to steady me. The look in Xinyi's eyes suddenly became dark. I noticed his gaze was fixed on a place he shouldn't be looking. Terrified, I shook my robe and took a step back as if hit by an electric shock. I was afraid my female curves, which couldn't be hidden, would make Xinyi notice the anomaly, but I didn't expect Xinyi to think I loathed his physical touch. His gaze instantly turned cold. His hands were still in the posture of holding me, which looked particularly awkward and out of place. Before Xinyi could lose his temper, I quickly reached out and took his large hand. Pointing ahead to change the subject, my lord, the pomegranate flowers ahead are blooming brilliantly. Why don't we go take a look? Xinyi held my hand back, his thumb gently rubbing it. The tension in his body vanished instantly. Xinyi treated me better and better. People in the palace are the most opportunistic. My days recently have been smoother and smoother. Batches of exquisite treasures were sent to my palace, as if they intended to fill the place up. Especially on the day Xinyi sent over the western fire fox fur. I was facing the bronze mirror, applying makeup to my Adam's apple, when I heard his steady footsteps. I hurriedly hid everything and went to greet him, looking at the rare treasures carried by the eunuchs behind him. I hinted subtly if it was too extravagant. Xinyi waved his hand. It's fine. These are all from my personal collection. It doesn't cost the national treasury a cent. My heart skipped a beat. This situation seemed to be getting out of control. At night, I tossed and turned, thinking about the exhaustion of my current life. This led to the court assembly the next day, where on the dragon throne, I performed a nodding-off act for all the ministers. Until the little eunuch beside me tapped my shoulder, and I slowly woke up. Opening my eyes, I found everyone in the hall staring straight at me with strange expressions. I felt uneasy. What was this about? Could I have drooled while napping? I used my sleeve to quietly wipe the corner of my mouth. The little eunuch took the chance to lean into my ear and whispered a few words in a low voice. The next second, my eyes widened like copper bells. I almost jumped off the dragon throne. Someone was tired of living. They submitted a memorial hoping I would hold a beauty pageant to fill the harem. Usually, major court matters only needed Xinyi's nod. But this concerned my lifelong happiness. They indeed had to ask for my opinion as the person involved. Xinyi's gaze was calm as water, staring straight at me. He seemed to be waiting to see how I would court death. Thinking about Xinyi's recent, unfathomable behavior, my brain short-circuited. The words of refusal I intended to say somehow turned into an agreement. Instantly, Xinyi's handsome face was covered in dark clouds, so dark it could drip water. I seemed to faintly hear the sound of his molars grinding together. After that day, I rarely saw the regent. Previously, he always liked to stand behind me. While I was reviewing memorials, his breath would brush past my ear. Sometimes, the brush would even touch the back of my hand. He would scold, "Your Majesty can't even write characters straight." But now, he stood very far away even during court sessions. His dark python robe was wrapped in cold detachment. His gaze swept over me, as if I were just an insignificant shadow on the dragon throne. "My lord, the memorial from Jiangnan." I held the scroll, panting as I chased him out of the hall. He paused but didn't turn around. He just coldly uttered a few words. "Leave it on the table." His voice was like cracked ice. "I will get it myself." I watched his resolute back and sighed. I had no idea if the days ahead would be a blessing or a curse. To my surprise, Xinyi seemed to have suddenly come around. He actually sent many beautiful palace maids to serve me. With a cold face, he led 10 maids to me. His tone was formal. "Your Majesty is reaching adulthood. It's time to fill the harem." Looking at the women before me, each as beautiful as a flower and with eyes full of affection, I randomly pointed to the one who looked the most quiet and well-behaved. That night, I summoned her. I had already mentally prepared myself. Once it's dark and the lamp is blown out, it'll be pitch black. I would just pretend to be a prodigy. Although my reputation might be a bit tarnished, at least I could keep my head. Unexpectedly, as soon as the candle was extinguished, the palace door was kicked open violently. Xinyi stood outside with a grim face, his eyes bloodshot, his thin lips parted, spitting out one word, "Get out." The maid was scared out of her wits and fell off the dragon bed. Too late even to put on shoes, she scrambled out of the hall. In the pale moonlight, I lay deep in the dragon bed, trembling as I watched the regent standing at the door like a god of death. He walked toward me step by step. I instinctively got out of bed and stood by his side. Only then did I smell the strong scent of alcohol on him. The room was in darkness. Suddenly, Xinyi reached out and tightly gripped my arm. Restraining himself, "My lord, you are drunk." I tried to break free from his iron grip and step back, but I was suddenly pulled to his front. The smell of wine mixed with sandalwood hit me, making my head spin. His rough fingertips traced the sensitive flesh on my neck. His eyes swirled with a deep affection and despair I couldn't understand. "Does your Majesty know I often dream of you?" My whole body froze, unable to move. His thumb pressed against my lips, tracing them gently. "Dreaming of you like this." Then his finger slowly moved down, eventually stopping over my heart. "Yes." Finally, he tightly squeezed my wrist, his voice filled with endless pain and struggle. "Yet you are a man." As the last word fell, he suddenly released my hand as if he had been burned by something. I seized the opportunity to kneel at the regent's feet, my voice trembling. "The regent and I are both the last of our families. The regent took pity on our similar fates and spared my life. I am deeply grateful." Unexpectedly, Xinyi's face turned incredibly cold. My words, undoubtedly and soberly, pointed out the deadlock between us. First, his potential cut-sleeve tendency. Second, the blood feud of clan extermination between us. Xinyi suddenly choked my neck, forcing me to look up. I was shaking like a leaf. It felt like in the next second he would snap my neck. After a long time, he finally let go. I gasped for air, as if I had just survived a catastrophe. Xinyi sneered. "Your Majesty truly shares the Xiao family's trait, similar to the late emperor, casting someone aside after they've served their purpose." He was implying that I relied on him for a good life. But now I wanted to draw a line. I smiled bitterly. Whether I could live or how I would live, wasn't it all up to his word? Since that day, I haven't seen Xinyi at all. He lied to the court officials, saying I was ill. Now I don't even have to show up for morning court. I have completely become a ghost in the palace. The days without the regent seemed exceptionally boring. I suddenly realized that in nearly a year of being together, he had completely permeated every part of my life. He was everywhere. It wasn't until Xinyi's guard found me that I knew Xinyi was ill. I pretended to ask the guard casually, "What illness does the regent have?" The guard stammered, his eyes dodging mine. "My lord has excessive internal heat. He needs rest." While I was pondering the deeper meaning of those words, The carriage had already stopped at the regent's manor. Your Majesty, the regent requests your presence. The regent's manor was even more grand than the palace. When I saw the regent in the study, he was draining his third jar of strong wine. His robe was open, revealing a muscular chest. Giving him a wild look, "My lord," I stood at the door, hesitant to enter. Hearing me, Shinny looked up, his eyes bloodshot. His voice was low and raspy. "Is your Majesty afraid of me?" I shook my head quickly and moved inside cautiously. Unexpectedly, as soon as I got close, he pulled me onto his lap. "Does your Majesty know what they are saying in court?" The strong smell of wine hit me. I stammered, saying what? Shinny grit his teeth. Saying that I have dragon sun tastes. His long fingers dangerously traced my chin. "What does your Majesty think?" I was scared out of my wits, my voice trembling. "I think my lord is wise and powerful. It must be a rumor." Shinny laughed suddenly. He leaned into my ear, his hot breath fanning me. "But what if it's true?" I froze in his arms. Shinny buried his head in the side of my neck. His voice raspy and low, with a sense of resigned determination. "I've tried avoiding you, but it's no use. Women don't work for me either. I even thought about killing you." His hand gripped my neck. But the pressure was as light as a lover's caress. "But I still can't." I shook. "Then what does my lord intend to do?" Shinny stared intently at my lips. His tone firm. "So what if there's a blood feud? There is nothing I want that I cannot get. So, I'll just accept my fate." The next second, I felt a warmth on my lips. Perhaps the room was too hot. My heart beat like a drum, yet I never pushed the regent away. Shinny seemed to have no taboos anymore, becoming even more bold. When reviewing memorials, he insisted on sharing the throne with me. During meals, he'd snatch my cherry pork. Even on the training grounds, he publicly tied my loosened cloak strings. The officials' looks grew stranger and stranger. The old prime minister looked at me, as if I were a kingdom-toppling temptress. Is my lord trying to make this reputation official? I finally couldn't help but protest. Shinny nonchalantly played with a lock of my hair. His gaze lazy. "So what?" Angry, I stepped on his foot and hissed a curse. Traitorous official. Instead of getting angry, he pulled me by the waist. "Does your Majesty want to punish me then?" He was about to kiss me, when I hurriedly covered his mouth. I heard the sound of a teacup shattering outside. A little eunuch had witnessed everything, dropping his tray in shock. The next day, the entire palace was gossiping about the regent forcing a kiss on the emperor. There were many versions. Now that things had come to this, I kept debating whether to tell Shani the truth. But I was truly afraid of his wrath. After all, he had finally managed to accept his nature with a clear conscience. What if he really only likes men? If he discovers I'm a woman, would he be so humiliated he'd turn to rage and cut off my head? I never expected my fear to finally become reality. A drunk Shani staggered into my bedchamber, looking at his predatory stance. He seemed ready for that final step. "I am Xiaoyu, the 13th emperor of the Great Liang dynasty. I've been on the throne for 1 year and 3 days. Right now, I'm being pinned on the dragon bed by my regent." His hands were fumbling over me. My voice shook. My lord." I squirmed and dodged, like a rabbit caught by the neck. Shani narrowed his beautiful phoenix eyes, his fingers moving further down. "Don't panic, your Majesty. Just enjoy." The next second, my eyes widened. Shinyi's fingers suddenly stopped. He frowned, as if he had touched something unbelievable. "Your Majesty, why are you missing something here?" My vision went dark. "I'm dead. Xiaoyu." He grit his teeth and hissed out, "You are a woman?" Trembling, I pulled my clothes together and knelt. "My lord, spare me." Shinyi's handsome face turned pale, then flushed, finally settling on a strange red. He pulled open the front of my dragon robe. He gasped when he saw the chest binding. "Good. Very good." He clenched his jaw and nodded repeatedly. "I supported a female emperor to the throne. The one the court has been kneeling to for a year is just a slip of a girl." He grabbed my collar, fury swirling in his eyes, along with disbelief. "Xiaoyu, how dare you?" I scrambled off the bed to run, but he grabbed me by the waist. I slammed hard against the sharp corner of a table. Pain brought instant tears to my eyes. "My lord," I begged in a trembling voice. I can explain." He sneered, his fingers gripping my chin. "Explain how you disguised yourself as a man, how you fooled the entire court. How?" His voice suddenly dropped, carrying a trace of undetectable hurt. "How you played me like a fool." I had never seen him look like this. Like someone stabbed by their most trusted person. Even his fingertips were trembling slightly. At that moment, my heart felt a dull ache. I was locked in my own bedchamber. Shani withdrew all the servants, clearly intending to leave me there to fend for myself. The palace doors were locked, the armored guards were outside the window. Every day, only cold meals were passed through the door. He never showed his face again. I curled up on the bed, watching the moonlight, recalling the look he gave me over and over. Anger, disappointment, and a trace of pain I couldn't decipher. In the empty hall, thinking about my future misery, a sense of unwillingness rose in me. I must escape. I want to live. Behind the hall, I discovered another hidden dog hole. The weeds around it were overgrown. Clearly, no one knew about this place. I carefully measured the size of the hole. It would definitely not trap my small frame. The rain was torrential, with thunder and lightning. This was an opportunity not to be missed. I changed into a palace maid's dress, packed a bundle with some valuables. As I crawled out of the dog hole, my palms were scraped bloody by the gravel. I stumbled toward the cold palace. There was a side gate there, leading straight out of the palace. Just as I turned the corner, I ran headlong into a patrol. Halt! That familiar voice made my blood freeze instantly. It was Shani. My body stiffened, and my mind went completely blank. Without stopping to think, I turned and bolted. However, 2 legs were no match for his long ones. Before I could go far, he had already caught up. His large hands were like iron pincers, gripping my arms tightly. The next second, my world spun. As I was violently pulled into his embrace, the familiar scent of agarwood, mixed with the chill of the rain, hit me all at once, enveloping me instantly. Crawling through dog holes and trying to escape again? In Xingyi's voice, there was a trace of frustrated anger. Then his tone softened slightly, though it was still cold enough to cut through ice. Where exactly is your majesty heading? His grip was so tight my bones ached. I was forced to look up and meet his terrifyingly bloodshot eyes. My whole body couldn't stop trembling. I stammered, my lord, but he only gave a cold sneer, and without a word, he tore off his cloak, wrapped me tightly in it, scooped me up horizontally, and strode purposefully toward my bedchamber. Inside, the charcoal fire was burning intensely. The heat hit us as we entered. Shani threw me onto the couch like a sandbag, but he stood 3 paces away, staring at me fixedly. His gaze was dark and unreadable. My lord. I huddled in the corner, my voice shaking like a leaf in the wind. I can explain. Explain what? He suddenly closed in, slamming his palm heavily against the bedpost by my head. I flinched at the sound. Explain why you lied to me? Or explain why you'd rather crawl through a dog hole than beg me? I was completely stunned. Only then did I realize his robes were soaked, and water was still dripping from his hair. He looked quite disheveled, clearly having searched for me in the downpour for a long time. The fear in my heart dissipated slightly. I tremblingly took out a handkerchief, stood on tiptoe, and wiped the cold rain from his face. I whispered softly, I was afraid you would kill me. His breath hitched, and the emotions in his eyes were like a surging flood, nearly drowning me. With gritted teeth, he suddenly leaned down and kissed me fiercely. His force was so strong, it felt like he wanted to devour me, carrying a clear sense of punishment. Xiao Yu, do you really think I could bear to? That night, the candles in the chamber stayed lit until dawn. Shani held me tightly in his arms, listening to his voice filled with lingering fear, as I poured out my heart to him. My mother was out of favor. She feared I'd be killed, so she had me dress as a boy. The late emperor never even knew he had a daughter. Shani rested his chin on the top of my head, nodding gently. It turned out that these things, during the days I was confined, he had already investigated thoroughly. He suddenly reached out and tilted my chin up, forcing me to look at him. So, during this past year, why did you shake like a leaf every time I came near? I nodded vigorously. I was afraid you'd find out at court. You deliberately acted innocent? I was afraid you'd think I was too clever to control. And you ate so little at every meal? Was it because your bindings were too tight? My face flushed. Not exactly. When I was little, I never had enough to eat, so my stomach just shrank over time. Xingyi's hold on my arm suddenly tightened. He gently rubbed his chin against my cheek, like a silent form of comfort. After that night, Xingyi never mentioned imprisonment again. However, every day after the court session, he would surely report to Zhaohua Hall. He'd watch me eat and review memorials. Your Majesty handled this one incorrectly. He would hold my hand to correct it, while his lips lingered on my neck. My hand shook so much I couldn't write. My lord, I can't concentrate like this. Shani leaned down, his warm breath tickling my ear. Call me Brother E. My ears burned red. I was so embarrassed I wanted to disappear into the floor. Bro. Brother E. He kissed the top of my head with satisfaction, then suddenly grew serious. Today, the Vice Minister of Rights asked about your marriage. I managed to brush him off for now, but in the long run, it will cause trouble. My heart tightened. True, an emperor must eventually have heirs. But at that moment, a glint of cunning flashed in Xinyi's eyes. How about this? We'll say the emperor has a twin sister living among the commoners. She's just been found, and I intend to marry her. I blinked. Not quite processing it. Then He pinched my nose. Smiling like an old fox, he said, by day, you'll be the emperor, and by night, you'll be my princess consort. When the emperor passes away, the cousin's son will succeed the throne. I was dumbfounded. That actually works? Xinyi raised an eyebrow, looking quite proud of himself. What? Does your majesty doubt my methods? I shook my head hurriedly. This man was someone who could quell a border rebellion in 3 months. Fooling the court officials was definitely a piece of cake for him. Sure enough, during the court session 3 days later, Xinyi publicly announced that the emperor's long-lost cousin had been found, and that he intended to marry her. Given the regent's formidable power, no one dared to say a single word against it. On the day of the grand wedding, I spent the day miserably performing my role as emperor. To preside over the marriage, at night, I had to change into a bridal gown and sneak out via a secret path to the regent's mansion to complete the ceremony with Xinyi. On our wedding night, Xinyi lifted my bridal veil, looking at me in the phoenix crown and bridal robes. His eyes were deep as ink. My lady is truly beautiful today. I pushed him away with a red face. Don't play around. There is still a court session early tomorrow. Xinyi pressed me down onto the bed, whispering in my ear, rest assured, your majesty, I will be mindful. The next day, I appeared at court with 2 massive dark circles under my eyes, exhausted and swaying on my throne. Xinyi, however, stood below looking perfectly refreshed, and even gave me an ambiguous wink. He was truly a beast in gentleman's clothing. After the session, I was dozing in the imperial study, when I was suddenly pulled into a warm, broad embrace. Sleepy? Xinyi kissed my forehead. I nodded dizzily. It's all your fault, he chuckled. Then I shall accompany your majesty for a short nap. I opened my eyes warily, emphasizing, just a nap. Xinyi looked innocent. Of course, in the end, that nap became something quite indescribable. Afterward, I glared at him crossly. Is the regent planning a rebellion? Xinyi slowly helped me tie my belt, saying with a straight face, as your subject, I am merely fulfilling my duty to the imperial bloodline. I was completely speechless. And so, I began a double life, emperor by day, and princess consort by night. Xinyi, that treacherous official, grew more audacious. One day he wanted this. The next day he wanted that. It left my body aching all day long. 6 months later, I was pregnant. When Xinyi found out, he was happy as a fool. He spun me around 3 times in the imperial garden, nearly causing the old eunuch nearby to faint. I'm going to be a father. He grinned like a silly young boy. I was worried. What are we going to do? Xinyi already had a plan. A light flashed in his eyes. We'll say the emperor was mortally wounded during an incognito trip. Then let the cousin bring her son to the throne. My lip twitched. You're getting better and better at lying. He kissed my forehead. For you and the child, what's a little lie? And so, on a dark and windy night, it was announced the emperor had been assassinated. The entire nation mourned. 5 months passed in the blink of an eye. I gave birth to a set of twins, a boy and a girl. Xinyi held the babies, grinning from ear to ear. The son looks like you, and the daughter looks like you, too. I leaned weakly against the headboard. Names? Xinyi nodded. The son will be Xiao Mingji. The daughter will be Xin Mingyue. I looked at him in surprise. The daughter takes your surname? He gently kissed my forehead, his voice firm. Our son inherits the empire, and our daughter inherits the Xin family legacy. In this way, our bloodlines will never be separated. My eyes welled up. How can this man be so charming? On the day of the baby's full moon celebration, Xinyi held a massive banquet at the mansion. After a few drinks, he suddenly knelt on one knee, taking out a warm, smooth jade pendant. Back then, it was the cousin I married. Today, I want to formally propose again. Xiao Yu, be my, Xinyi's, only wife for life. Tears streamed down my face. Witnessed by everyone, I performed the ceremony with him once more. That night, leaning in his arms, I couldn't help asking, when you found out I was a woman, did you really want to kill me? Xinyi chuckled, playing with my fingers. To be honest, my first thought was, thank goodness I'm not gay after all. I punched him playfully. Be serious. He caught my hand and kissed it, his eyes full of adoration. Actually, I'd suspected something was off for a long time. You were so afraid of me getting close. And you always smelled so sweet. I blushed. Then you, he whispered. I told myself that as long as it's you, it's fine.